So we're going to now begin in Mirz Hashem, the second parak of Sotah, starting with the Mishnah here on Daf Yud Daled Amud Aleph on the bottom. And this part of Sotah deals with Kodshim. Hayamevi es minchasa b'toch kfifa mitzris. So there are 2 points here that we have to make. Number one is that the husband brings the carbon mincha, and he's going to bring it to the Kohen. The Kohen is going to bring the mincha on the Mizbeach. That's point number one. Point number two is that he brings it in a kfifa mitzris, which is a kind of a palm basket made of palms, and it's very cheap. It's not very sophisticated, and it doesn't have the status of a kli sharis. Later on, we're going to have to put the mincha, transfer it over to a kli sharis. And the Mishnah is going to give us a sort of hashkafic explanation as to why we start the process here with a kfifa mitzris. And v'nosnal yodeha kidei liyaga. And then, after the husband brings the mincha in this palm basket, he places the mincha on her hands. She stretches out her hands, and this is all part of a process to exhaust her. And hopefully she'll confess her sin, and we'll save the entire process of blotting out the name of Hashem. Now the Mishnah goes on to contrast this carbon mincha v'sotah with all karbanos mincha. Kol ha-menachos tchilasan v'sofan b'kli sharis. Other menachos, they begin and they end in a kli sharis. And we'll see more details in the Gemara about this. But this particular carbon mincha, meaning the mincha sotah, tchilasa b'kfifa mitzris, v'sofa b'kli sharis. So it's only later on that the mincha is going to be transferred over from this palm basket over to a kli sharis. So instead of bringing this carbon mincha directly into the azar in a kli sharis, it was brought to the Kohen in a kfifa mitzris, in a basket of palm. And then later on, the Kohen would begin his avoda, which in the case of mincha, of course, is kmitza, with the 3 fingers. And the Mishnah continues by telling us another contrast between mincha sotah and all menachos. Kol menachos tu'uno shemen u'levona. Okay, levona is frankincense in English, but they require shemen and vizo. But this particular mincha, the mincha sotah, eina tu'uno lo shemen velo levona. Right? There's no neither shemen nor levona. And again, we're going to see the hashkafa behind this. Kol ha-menachos bos min achitim minchas ha-omer v'zu ba min ha-sa'orim. Okay, so the sa'orim barley is called Michael Behema, and since she was guilty of at least stira, if not of tuma, so therefore her carbon is from barley. However, there is one other carbon mincha that comes from barley, and that's minchas ha'omer. Afal pi sheba min ha'sa'omer, but nevertheless, there's a fundamental difference between the minchas ha'omer and the minchas sotah, even though they're both from seorin. And that's the question, is whether you take the seorin and you make it into a fine flour. Afal pisha bamin asa'orin he hoisa ba geresh. But the minchas ha'omer was brought from barley and it was converted into a fine flour. Vizu, but in the case of minchas sotah, ba kemach. Kemach means unrefined flour. It's almost what we would call today like bran or whole wheat, without refining it. And again, all this is indicative and expressive of the hashkafa that she went down to this lower level of what we call Maisa Behema. Rav Gamliel Omer, and here's where Rav Gamliel offers this hashkafic background or insight into the unique nature of Minchas Sotah. Kshem Shemaser Maisa Behema, since her actions were made her guilty of like an animal act, an animal is only interested in the physicality, is Kach Korbanah Machal Behema. So again, this is at the very least, a punishment, so to speak, for her level of stira. We don't know that she's guilty beyond stira, but the stira itself, in which she secludes herself with someone other than her husband, that's, in a sense, an animal kind of existence. I mean, animals are known not to be dedicated exclusively to one particular mate. I mean, we have it in the birds, we have something called a yona, but in the animal kingdom, an animal doesn't cleave, so to speak, to one particular partner, and she secluded herself with someone else, and that's called a Maisa Behem. The Gemara says the fine Tanya, we learned in the Brayso Abachanin Omer Mishum Rabbi Eliezer. Why are we forcing her to carry this basket of palm? And he says, Kidei liyag'ah, so that we exhaust her, Kidei shetachzir ba, so that ultimately our goal will be achieved, and she'll back down from her original claim. Her claim was that she was innocent, and she'll be willing to prove that by drinking from the Sotah. But we're hoping that she'll back down. Im kocha chasa Torah al ovre ritzono. Now watch what happens here. We're talking about a woman who might be guilty of the most severe crime of Gili Arayis, and yet the Torah is trying to let her live. And that expresses a chesed towards someone who doesn't really deserve chesed. Is kal v'chomer al osei ritzonu, how much more so will the divine compassion be extended to those who fulfill the will of God? Wait a second. You're telling me that the fact that we're trying to exhaust her and we're trying to evoke from her a confession of sin such that she doesn't have to drink for the Meimorim, that's because the Torah Hashem has compassion on her. No. Who says? It has nothing to do with compassion on her. It has to do with obliterating Hashem's name. Maybe that's the reason why we're trying to exhaust her and we're trying to evoke a confession of guilt from her. And the Gemara answers, Kasavar, and here we start, Daf Yudalit Amud Beis, Mashke, the Achakach Makriv Es Min Chasa. There's machlokes as to when exactly the hashka, the mashke that she drinks took place. Is it before the Karban Mincha, or is it after the Karban Mincha? Now, De'imi Shum Megillah, Ha'imcha Kola, we're going now, according to the Mandiyomar and Mishnah, reflects the Shita that her drinking is after she brought the Mincha. And that's going to be machlokis in the Gemara later on in Daf Yud Tes. When exactly is the Minchas Sotah brought? According to one Tana, it's before she drinks from the bitter waters. But the other Tana, that's our Tana, holds that it's afterwards. So she's already she's already brought the Korban Mincha, and she already drank from the bitter waters. So if she's already drunk from the bitter waters, then at this point in time, when we're exhausting her by having her carrying this basket with the Minchas Sotah in it, it's going to be too late to avoid obliterating the name of Hashem, because the obliterating of the name Hashem with the Megillah Sotah took place before the Korban Mincha was brought. And now after the Korban Mincha, she is now going to drink from the bitter waters. So it's already too late to avoid Mechikas Hashem. And therefore, the only explanation that we can have as to why we try to tie her out is because we want to spare her life. And that's the compassion of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, extended even to someone who is less than innocent. Now we get to the laws of menachos. Kol ha-menachos. So now we're saying that the menachos are brought in a kli shares. Is that really true? Uraminu, I want to present to you a brisa that contradicts this very premise that all the menachos are brought in a kli shares. That's not true. So now the brisa is going to go through the seder menachos, ketzad, and we're going to focus on one point in this entire long brisa. Other maybe mincha b'toch beso. He brings a mincha from his house, b'klosos shel kesef v'shel zav. And the word klosos means baskets. And we're assuming, therefore, that the beginning of the process, we're not dealing with kli shares, because these klosos were privately owned. They were not kli shares. And it's only later that the mincha is transferred from these klosos into a kli shares. So we see already clearly up front that all menachos, like mincha sotah, begin the process without a kli shares, which is against our Mishnah that establishes that all menachos are brought in a kli shares. Then we add the shemen and the levona on top of the kemach. Umalicha itzel kohen, v'kohen malicha itzel mizbeach, umagisha b'keren dromis ma'ravis. Okay, we'll have a long sugya here about keren dromis ma'ravis, which is the southwest of the mizbeach. Keneged chuda shel keren, the tip of the corner. Vidayo, again, what exactly vidayo means, we don't know. That's going to be a whole sugya. Umesalikes halavona l'tzad echad. Notice the kmitza should be done in a way that the kmitza is done purely on the flour, but not on the levona. So the levona has to be removed to the side. V'komeitz mi makom shenisraba shamna. And the Kohen is going to do the kmitza from one place of the mincha where the oil is abundant. In other words, the oil is going to be mixed with the flour. And then we have a second kli shares, and the Gemara is going to wonder why we need another kiddush b'kli shares. He collects the levona v'nosna gabav, and he puts it on top of the komets, and then Maileu Makteu b'Kli Shares. And with that Kli Shares, he's Maleh. Does that mean that he puts the Kli Shares on the fire? That's going to be a sugya. Umolcho v'nosnal gabi ha'ishim. He places salt. The Gemara is going to derive that from a pasuk, and then he puts it on top of the fire. V'karev ha'komets. The komets is burnt with aktorah. Shiareh nechon. That haktaras hakomets is matir the achilas hashirayim. Whatever is left in the kli shares minus the kmitza, the balance is now mutal achilas kohanim v'rashayim hakohanim litein l'socha yayin v'shem udvash. There's halacha called lemashcha legdula, and they should add wine, oil, and honey. V'yein asurim ela milachametz. However, they're not allowed. They're not permitted to allow this shiare mincha to become chametz. Ktani mias b'klosos shel kesef klos shel zav. So we see at the very beginning of the seder of menachos, the brisa indicates that we start with klosos, and klosos are not kli shares. So where's the contrast here between minchas sotah and other menachos? Amar Rav Papa. The contrast here is not in terms of whether you begin the process with the kli shares. In both cases, mechasot and shar menachos, we begin the process in a kli that's not a kli shares. But what is the nature of that kli? In the case of all menachos, we're talking about klosos, shel kesef, v'shel zav. So we're talking about something which is a very, shall we say, a beautiful kind of a kli. And such a kli could become a kli shares if we sanctify it and designate it as a kli shares. In contrast to the palm baskets, where the mincha sotah is placed initially before it transferred into a kli shares. And therefore, Omar of Papa Ema, we should say that our Mishnah, when it says that other menachos are brought in a kli shares, but kelim are uyim li kli shares, these are kelim that are fit potentially to become kli shares if the Bala Kli would be magdishit as such. Mechlal the kfifa mitzvus al chazia. And now we get to a machlokas tanoim, whether or not a kli like kfifa mitzvus, which is called a wooden vessel, right? It's made from palm, is fit to become a kli shares or not. Our Mishnah says it's not. Kiman delok Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda the Sanya Kli Sharesh Asan Shal Eitz Rebbe Posel. Rebbe is the author of our Mishnah here at the beginning of the second chapter of Sotah, who holds that a kli that's made of wood could never ever become a kli shares, and that's against Rabbi Yossi, who holds that no. A basket that's made of wood is fit to become a kli shares if it's consecrated by its bailam, by its owner. And the Gemara wants to say the following: you know what? I can square off our Mishnah even according to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. Afilu Tamer Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, Eimer Domer Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda b'chashuvin, b'pchusim yomar. It could be that even Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda would differentiate between two qualities of utensils. There's superior quality, and that's where Rabbi Yossi would say that I admit that even if it's made of wood, it could become a kli shares, but then there's something called pchusim, inferior ones. They come from these palm baskets. Less later, Rabbi Yehuda, krivu no lefechasecha. And that's the point, that this is a pasuk in Malachi that teaches us that you cannot use inferior items in the avodas hamikdash. So although Rabbi Yossi would not necessarily disqualify a wooden vessel as a kli shares, as long as it's not an inferior basket, but the minchas sotah was carried in an inferior basket, and that would violate the principle of hakrivi no lefechasecha, and Rabbi Yehuda would agree that it is possible and it doesn't have the potential of becoming a kli shares. V'nos no lekli shares mekacha b'kli shares shmamino klei shares hay mekacha no midas. The Gemara now in the Havamin understands that v'nosna, which literally translates as to place it, but it means v'nosna b'kavana, b'das. It was transferred over to a kli shares for the express purpose and for the intention of becoming kadosh b'kli shares. And the Gemara says, "Ema nosna b'kli shares lekadsha b'kli shares." Perhaps what the Mishnah has in mind here is that you put it into a kli shares, not necessarily with the intention, express kavana or das, to be mekadesh it in the kli shares, but it will be eventually sanctified in the kli shares even without das. So what it means is not sanctify it with a kavana, but thereby it becomes sanctified. So it's not a din in the Maisa Gavra, but rather in the Cheft itself. The Cheft itself in a Kli Shares becomes Niskadesh b'Kli Shares. The Brisa says, "V'nosein oleh shamna ulevona." And the Gemara explains that this is based on a pasuk shenemar v'yatzak oleha shemen v'nasan oleha nevona. And it's interesting that this pasuk v'yatzak oleha shemen v'nasan oleha nevona is not addressing the Kohanim. Even a hedjot who's not a Kohen can do this action of yitzikas shemen unesinas levona. But when we get to the Mizbeach, then Molicha Eitzel HaKohen, only the Kohen is kosher for the avoda of Haktaras HaMincha Gabi Mizbeach, T'chsiv Vehevi'ah El B'nei Aaron. And all this is at the very beginning of Sefer Vayikra, and the actions up until this point of Vehevi'ah can be performed even by a non-Kohen. The Kohen Molicha Eitzel Mizbeach, so this is what we call Holacha, otherwise known in biblical Hebrew as Hagasha, D'chsiv v'gisha el hamizbeach. And this addresses the Kohanim, and that has to do with Holacha. Okay, now we get to the more complicated part of this sugya. Magisha bekeren dromis maravis, keneged chuda shel keren v'daya. So let's give a little bit of an introduction here. We have two psukim in the parsha of Menachos in Vayikra Perek Vav. And these two psukim, they're not really psukim, they're parts of psukim, seem to contradict each other. It's going to say in the Torah, Lifnei Hashem, and it's going to say in the Torah, El Pnei HaMizbeach. So the Gemara says, "Minon d'chsiv v'zos Toras hamincha hakrev osa b'nei Aaron lifnei Hashem." Let's emphasize those two words, lifnei Hashem, which indicate what's called a marav. And yet the pasuk continues and says El pnei hamizbeach, which indicates the daram. So what is it going to be? Is it going to be marav, or is it going to be Durham? And we're going to try to reconcile that by coming up with Dromis Maravis. Bisanya, we learned in the Brisa, Lifnei Hashem. What does Lifnei Hashem refer to? Marav, to the western side. I have a little bit of a diagram here, and you could see that north is up, south is down, west is to the left, east is to the right, and the Azara is to the left of the Mizbeach. So the Mizbeach is on the east, and the Azara is on the left. Now, on the western part of the Azara, so we're really going west-west, now we get to what we call the Heichal. Now, if you draw a straight line from the Mizbeach to the Heichal, and you're going from east to west, then the width of north to south is 32 amos. Now, the space of 32 amos can be divided up into different, broken down into different parts. But for our purposes, what we need is 20 amos for the interior airspace and 6 amos for the thickness of the two walls. So the Mizbeach is placed midway between the south and the north walls of the Azara. And it's on, as we said before, the eastern, it's due east of the Heichal. And since the Mizbeach itself measured 32 amos, and it was 32 amos on each side, so basically you have a square of 32 amos square. The western wall on the left, that's called Bifnei Hashem, Lifnei Hashem. Why? because there was nothing between the left side of the Mizbeach, which is called the Marav, and the Heichal. Now, again, it's a little complicated because the Ulam was actually in front of the Heichal and separated the Heichal from the Mizbeach. But apparently the Ulam had an opening, as we said before, of 20 amos, which is as wide as the interior space of the Heichal. So it didn't block the altar from being Bifnei Hashem. So that's all on the west side. And that's called Lifnei Hashem. However, you can't just put it on the west side of the Mizbeach because Talmud Lomer El Pnei HaMizbeach. Now, what's Pnei HaMizbeach? Pnei HaMizbeach is the part of the Mizbeach where the Kohen entered in and climbed up to the Mizbeach. That's on the southern side. So Pnei HaMizbeach means in front of the Mizbeach, and that's on the south. Nu Yachal Badorom, Tamalom Lifnei Hashem. So we have now a contradiction. Is it Lifnei Hashem on the western side, or is it El Pnei HaMizbeach on the southern side? Okay, so how do we reconcile this? Magisha Bekeren Dromis Maravis. So if you get to the southwest corner of the Mizbeach, then you have both a kiyum of Lifnei Hashem on the west and a kiyum of El Pnei HaMizbeach on the south. Vidayo. We'll see what the word Vidayo means soon. And now we get to the Bar Plukta of the Tanakam of this Brisa, and that's Rabbi Eliezer. Yachal Yagishenu b'marav shel Keren olidroma shel Keren. Maybe the Torah, in this so-called contradiction, is giving us two options. He could either bring the mincha on the west, and that would mean Lifnei Hashem, or on the south, which would be El Pnei HaMizbeach. And now Rabbi Eliezer invokes a principle that applies to darshaning, to interpreting the Torah whenever there's a contradiction. Amen. Kol makom shata motzei shnei mikros. Echem mekayim atzmo, mekayim direi chavero. V'echem mekayim atzmo, mekayim direi chavero. So you have two psukim, and one will fulfill itself, the other fulfills the other, or another one that fulfills itself but negates the other. So what do I do in such a case? What is the underlying principle that applies? Manichem es shemekayim atzmo umevatel es chavero v'tovsin es shemekayim atzmo umekayim chavero. So what that means is that although there's an apparent contradiction between these two psukim, and if you mekayim and fulfill one pasuk, you can somehow be consistent with the requirement of another pasuk. So basically, it's mekayim atzmo umekayim es chavero. However, if you take the second pasuk, in certain cases, of course, cannot be consistent with the first pasuk, which means it's mekayim atzmo umevatel es chavero. So what's the rule in this case? We're going to go with the first pasuk. The first pasuk establishes the ikar chova, the primary requirement. And we're going to try to make sure that both verses can now be mekuyam. We can, let's say, we can have a compliance of both psukim rather than giving up the option of fulfilling one at the expense of the other pasuk. Okay, how does this apply in our case? Shata Omer Lifnei Hashem b'marav. We said that Lifnei Hashem, which is the Heichal, and that's on the Marav side, Bitaltas Pnei HaMizbeach Badara. Then by applying Lifnei Hashem, you cannot fulfill El Pnei HaMizbeach, because that's in the southern side. Shata Omer El Pnei HaMizbeach B'darom. If, on the other hand, you're going to start with El Pnei HaMizbeach, which means the front of the Mizbeach, which is on the south, because the Mizbeach goes from the south to the north, then Kiyamtu Lifnei Hashem b'Marav. You can still fulfill Lifnei Hashem b'Marav by going from the south on the western side, or Ketzad, Magisha Lidroma Shel Keren. Okay, so wait a second. Magisha Lidroma Shel Keren, the south side, I mean, if you're doing it on the south side, then why is that called the west? Heichon Kiyamta, how did you fulfill Lifnei Hashem when we said that Lifnei Hashem means the western side, and you were Mekayim El Pnei Mizbeach on the southern side? So which side of the Mizbeach are you on? Are you on the southern side or on your western side? Rav Ashi, because Savrai Taina Kula Mizbeach B'Tzafon Koi. Okay, so this Rabbi Lazar has a different shita as to where the Mizbeach stood. The Mizbeach, with relationship to the Azara, was in the north side. We have a little bit of a diagram here. And what it means is that Rabbi Lazar rejects the Tanakama's assumption that the Mizbeach was sort of in the middle between the north and the south. But rather, according to Rabbi Lazar, the Mizbeach was on the north side. So the front, which is the south side, is now, how we say mimul. It's opposite the middle of the opening to the Heichal, right? So that's all the way on the south side. So if the Kohen brings the mincha on the south side, then he's going to also be fulfilling the western side, because the south is keneged, since the entire altar is on the north, is keneged the Heichal. My vidayo, what does the Brayso mean when it says that's enough? Rav Ashi Itzrich. What's the chiddush? Salkedait chaminiti boy agoshas mincha gufa. Kamash malon. Okay, so we would have thought that at stage one, we said the mincha was not subject to kiddush in a klisharis. So if that be the case, just one second, what was the Havamina here? Tiboy agoshas mincha gufa. Here's the issue. We have the mincha, the flour, let's say, in a kli sharis. Now, there are two ways of understanding agosha. One would be that the Kohen has to tilt the klishares in a way that the flour itself inside the klishares has a direct contact with the mizbeach. So the Kohen would now tilt the klishares, and the kemach touches the mizbeach. So the word vidayo here in the Brisa is kamashmalon, that all the Kohen has to do is that the mincha, which is inside the klishares touches the mizbeach, even though there's no direct contact between the flour itself and the mizbeach. V'yema hachinami. Is there a source for this conclusion, this kula, that the mincha itself does not have to come in contact with the mizbeach? Maybe it does. Amakra, the pasuk says, "V'kriva el hakohen v'gisha el hamizbeach." So there's an equation here in this pasuk between hakrava and hagasha, because the pasuk opens with v'kriva and ends with v'gisha. Ma krova eitzel kohen bikli. When the kohen takes hold of the mincha, it's in a kli shares. So basically, the kohen doesn't have any direct contact with the flour. He's only holding on to the kli. Is afhagosha when he connects the korban mincha with the mizbeach, it's bekli. Just like the hakrava is bekli, so to the gosh al gabi mizbeach or eitzal mizbeach is bekli. Misalik es halavona litzad echad ki echid lo tikmos bahari mincha. The kmitz has to be done directly and exclusively with the flour, without any admixture of the levona. Kirisnan komatz violi yitzor o gager melech o kurt levona pos. So the Mishnah in Masechet Menachos at the very beginning of the Masechta establishes that the kmitza, in order to be valid, the Kohen has to bend his 3 fingers over his palm, fill up that area with flour and with oil. If that area, that space between his 3 fingers and his palm is occupied by anything other than the flour, for example, we have a pebble, we have salt, or even the levona itself, it's almost like a din of chatzitza. And it passes the kmitza. The kometz mimakom shenisraba shamna, and he takes a kometz from the place where the oil is beribui, it's an abundant oil. Minolan, how do we know this? Dichsiv misalta umishamna migirsa umishamna. From its fine wheat flour, from its oil, from its fine barley flour, and from its oil. So this is a pasuk in Perek Beis of Vayikra, and the Torah mentions the Sotah umishmana, which means the flour and the oil, in one breath, teaching us that the kometz is to be taken from where the flour was thoroughly saturated with oil. And basically in the kometz, we have a representation of both flour, which is called soles, and oil, which is called shemen. Wait a second. Why are we transferring it from one klishares to another? This is a second klishares. He already had placed the entire mincha in a klishares, so he was makadesh the mincha already once. Why is it necessary to makadesh the mincha a second time? You need to have here adam, and we're going to take a precedent from dam. And this has to do with sakin shel shchita. The sakin shel shchita in zvachim is a klishares. And with the shchita, there's kiddush adam, and yet the dam has to be collected in a klishares. So dam afal gav the kidshe sakin b'tzavar behema hadar makdish le b'klishares. Now I'm not sure exactly why you need 2 kiddushim. I was tempted to think, but this is a real a stretch of the imagination, that maybe the first kiddush is only kedushas damim, and the second is kedushas haguf. But it's very hard for me to believe that sakin is a klishares that only generates kedushas damim. So this requires a little bit more research. Anyway, Afagad the Kidshe Sakim B'Tzavar Behema Hadar Makdish Le B'Klishai Sachinami Loshna here too, with regard to the Mincha, even though he's Makadish it once in a Klishares, the Komets has to be Mekudash a second time. I'll tell you what, maybe what it means is the following. I'm just a thought that occurred to me as we're speaking, if you don't mind my sharing this with you. Perhaps what's going on is the following. There's a direct kiddush and an indirect kiddush. Like there's like a general kiddush and then a more specific honed-in kiddush. And that has to do with any situation in which the avoda is spread out and then it hones in. So, for example, in Shchitas HaZevach, you have the sakin shel shchitas makadish, the entire animal, the entire zevach, including the dam. But then he has to be makabel the dam in order to be zorek the dam. So there's a separate avoda on the dam. Here too, in the case of a mincha, you have a kiddush b'kli shares that includes the entire mincha, both what we would call the komets and the shirayim, and then he does the kmitza. And he needs another kiddush on that komets because that's where there's going to be a separate avoda of haktar al gabi mizbeach on the komets. The Brisa says, "Malaket es levonasa v'nosna al gabav." Right, he collects the levona, places it on top of the komets. The chsiv, this we derive from a pasuk again in Vayikra Vav. Almost everything we learned today is from Vayikra Perek Vav. And it says there, the ace kol alavona asher al ha-mincha. So the words asher al ha-mincha indicates that the levona requires haktara on the mizbech together with the komets. So he removes the komets of Kemach and the levona is also in the klisharis. He has to gather up the levona. He puts the komets into the klisharis, and both are burnt on the mizbech. And then it says, Uma alehu.